Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. We're delighted to have you here. And I especially want to welcome back my very dear friend, Luiz Moreno. We worked together, we worked together probably 15 years. I must say, he held up a lot better than I did. You know, he doesn't look a day older than when I first met him back in 2000. But he's done so many remarkable things, and I really would like to congratulate him for bringing this issue to everyone's attention. I mean, the question of cybersecurity, it's now become the greatest security issue in America, really. And we have not had a focus on what it means for our brothers and sisters that that inhabit this part of the Western Hemisphere. We've kind of left this alone. So I'm so glad that the ambassador has brought this to our attention, and I'm very grateful for that. We have a substitute. Luis Almagro is not able to be with us today, but fortunately, Mendez is going to be giving his presentation. So we're full, and I'll let Jim run this for a second. I just wanted to, first of all, I forgot, when we have events with people from outside, we always start with a little safety announcement. I'm your responsible safety officer, so I'm here to make sure you're going to be taken care of. If we have an emergency, we're not going to have it, but if we have an emergency, please follow my instructions. The exit that we came in there, right there, or this one here, takes us to the back, and the stairs that go down to the street are right in that corner, next to that exit, actually. If there are problems out in front, we're going to go back, and we're going to go over to the National Geographic and meet there. We have mutual support agreements with them, and if the problem's in the back, we're going to go out front and go down to St. Matthew's Cathedral, and where we get all kinds of extra higher help. So I'm delighted, but don't worry, but please follow my instructions if we do have to do anything. Jim, why don't you come up here and let's get this started, and thank you, panelists. I'm delighted that you're here.
Thank you.
Jim, take it away.
Thanks, John.
It is funny because the rally point is the big plastic dinosaur on M Street. So I was like, I always want to get a picture when we have our fire drills. Bienvenidos a todos. Thanks to everyone for coming out today. My name is James Lewis. I work at CSIS. This is a very significant event, and the report itself is significant and exceptionally valuable in guiding the efforts, not only in the hemisphere, but in the world. I think the OAS and the IDB have been leaders in cybersecurity, both on a regional and a global basis. So we're very happy today to be able to host this event. I'm going to introduce the keynote speakers. The process will be a couple keynotes, followed by a panel, and then an expanded panel to go through the report. So please, thank you again for coming. I'll begin by introducing Luis Alberto Moreno, who is the president of the Inter-American Development Bank, became president in 2005, and was recently, in September, reelected for a third term. A number of amazing achievements, including the 9th general capital increase, which those of you who know IFEs know how important that is, and including a historic financial program for Haiti of more than $2 billion. He's also strengthened the multi-sectoral work of the bank through cross-cutting programs and initiatives, including initiatives on sustainable energy and climate change, emerging and sustainable cities, which is, of course, a major problem for the hemisphere, the opportunities for the majority, and Connect Americas. So we're exceptionally grateful that he was able to come today and open our event for us. Filling in for Ambassador Almagro is Ambassador Nestor Mendez, who's the Deputy Secretary General of the Organization of American States. And while they have claimed to email me his bio, unfortunately I can't tell you what it is, but we're very grateful that he was willing to step in and fill in for us, an experienced diplomat who hopefully will forgive this faux pas. But what I'd like to do now is invite President Moreno to come and open the session.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Well, thank you very much, Jim. It's always good to be back here at CSIS. I'd like to again thank John Hamre, who's a dear friend for many years, and equally all of the members of the panel who are with us here today, and certainly to thank the OAS and Secretary General Almagro for joining the IDB in this effort. As you all know, in this digital age, the first thing most people do when they wake up, or even if they haven't waken up, they go to their phones to check messages, to catch up on the latest news. The whole world, as we know today, is at our fingertips, perhaps in 140 characters or less. Now, this is the beginning, and this is happening more and more in Latin America and in the Caribbean. We are already the world's fourth largest mobile communications market. In the year 2020, there will be more than 600 million smartphones that will be connected in our region, almost one for every adult. Clearly, we're embracing the digital revolution. More than half of our population already uses the internet. Our governments and businesses are offering more and more services online. We see all kinds of potential to boost productivity, to help participate in living standards by harnessing these new technologies. So naturally, our countries invest heavily in what we could call the 21st century infrastructure. And we'll increasingly depend on these technologies to both run and to monitor everything from our financial systems to our mass transportation, our power services, and/or our telecommunications. But like all great revolutions, this one also brings risks. And as CSIS has noted in their Global Cost of Cybercrime report, the economic impact of malicious activities in the digital realm is staggering. If we take the upper range of the estimate of this study, it's $575 billion a year. It is roughly 4 times more than what the world today spends on official development assistance. According to Symantec, just in the year 2014, there were more than 1 million software attacks a day, more than 300 million cases of identity theft were perpetrated, and nearly 500,000 websites a day were hacked. In our region, in Latin America and the Caribbean, the question therefore is, are we ready to deal with such risks? Can we guarantee that our citizens and the data they hold is safe? Can bank clients rest assured that their financial information is secured? Or can they vouch that our critical infrastructure is protected from cyber attacks? These are the questions that are addressed in this Cybersecurity Report 2016 that we're presenting today. Taking into account 49 indicators, we can only conclude that most of our countries are not prepared. In fact, if you look at most of these indicators, not all of them, only about 1 in 5 countries is ready. Out of 32 countries covered in the report, only 5 have developed cybersecurity strategies. Only 8 of the 32 have planning and coordination mechanisms to respond to cyber attacks on their critical infrastructure. In 30 out of 32 countries, citizens are insufficiently aware of the security and the privacy threats in cyberspace. We could go on and on. This is why we teamed up with the OAS to support the preparation and the launching of this report. And we really believe that this is a wake-up call to our region. We surely hope that this report will not only spark concern among our countries, but it equally encourages most of them, or all of them ideally, to take action, using the findings as a diagnostic tool of where the improvements are needed. Our actions counted with the very valuable support of the government of the Republic of Korea and we are at an advanced stage of conversations with the government of Israel to join efforts in this very issue. In the next meeting of Latin American and Caribbean cybersecurity officials in Uruguay, we'll offer an excellent opportunity to discuss what we can all do together to get the region ready to take the greatest advantage possible of the opportunities that these technologies offer. I'd like to end by thanking the 32 countries that participated in this report for their supply of the information and feedback that was needed for the success of the report. We're equally grateful to the talented experts from Oxford University, the Getulio Vargas Foundation, the European Council, the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams, the Potomac Institute, the World Economic Forum, for their valuable contributions. And of course, to our friends at CSIS, to John Hamre and all of his team, who not only worked on the request, but also for hosting us here today at their state-of-the-art headquarters. And thank you all of you who have an interest in strengthening cybersecurity in Latin America and the Caribbean. This is a task that exceeds what any single institution can achieve, so using the power of networks and of partnership will be indispensable to succeed. Finally, I want to thank all of my colleagues at the IDB, Ana Maria Rodriguez, Carlos Santizo, and all the team, and many of my colleagues who are here today. I know they've taken great interest on this issue, and it's only through their work and through their focus on this work that we can really make a difference. So thank you all very much. I hope we don't have to go to St. Matthew's, but I like that at CSIS, when problems happen, they go to a Catholic church. Thank you very much.
Yes, I hope that works out for us there. Thank you, President Moreno, for your opening remarks and for your insights into the problems we face. Let me now ask Ambassador Mendez if he would be willing to speak.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, señoras y señores. Muy buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Mr. John Hamre, President of CSIS, distinguished members of the panel. One of the worst times to address a group of people is shortly after lunch, because sometimes some people are challenged to remain awake. I promise you I won't speak too long, and I will try not to bore you, because I know I have that problem sometimes after lunch. Ladies and gentlemen, the report we are launching today reveals a stark truth. In terms of cybersecurity, the situation facing our region is dangerous. 4 of 5 countries in the region do not have cybersecurity strategies or plans to protect critical infrastructure, which leaves us exposed to potentially devastating consequences. In this context, our OS slogan of more rights for more people means we are committed to continue working to strengthen the capacities of our countries to protect the infrastructure, the economies, and of course, to protect the people of our region. Señoras y señores, dear friends and colleagues, the internet has revolutionized how we interact with each other and the world around us. Increasing connectivity links ever greater numbers of people together in a transnational and largely public space, and provides a growing and dynamic platform that enables communication, collaboration, and innovation in ways we could scarcely have imagined not long ago. This is especially so in Latin America and the Caribbean, where more than half of our population is now online, and the rate of growth in the number of internet users is among the highest in the world. In the Americas and the Caribbean, we're using the internet to share ideas and culture, to improve government and social services, to collaborate in education, the sciences, the arts, and of course, to do business, all with greater accessibility and efficiency. Chief among the benefits of this development is the impact it has had in stimulating new economic and social development, closing the gender divide and opening new opportunities for the less privileged. However, our increasing connectivity to and dependency on internet-based platforms and services has significantly increased our exposure to a host of security threats and criminal activities. Statistics clearly indicate that cyber attacks and incidents, particularly those carried out with criminal intent, are increasing in frequency and complexity. Governments and businesses have come to recognize the need for stronger cybersecurity frameworks, which include measures to improve resilience, as well as the importance of cooperation and the all-important information sharing. Cybercrime does not recognize national borders, and a multilateral and multidimensional effort is required to address the range of cyber threats. Indeed, important progress is being made even as we speak. The Organization of American States has been working with member states on cybersecurity and cybercrime for more than a decade, which is longer than any other international or regional organization. Since 2004, member states adopted the Comprehensive Inter-American Cybersecurity Strategy, which mandated the Inter-American Committee Against Terrorism, better known for its acronym in Spanish, CICTE, to engage member states on cyber issues. This strategy called on CICTE to ensure that countries have the ability to detect, to respond to, and prevent cyber incidents. CICTE has met this mandate through a multifaceted program that addresses technical capabilities, government policy, and awareness raising. Despite the progress we've achieved, it is critical that we understand the full scope of threats to our cyber domain, based on the most complete and up-to-date information available. Although there are several studies on cybersecurity capability at the national level, including a recent analysis of 4 countries conducted by CSIS, there is really a shortage of comprehensive data on cybersecurity capability in Latin America and the Caribbean. Since 2013, the OAS Cybersecurity Program has worked to address this information gap through a series of cybersecurity reports published in collaboration with industry leaders. In this context, at the end of 2014, the OAS and the IDB met to begin planning a holistic study on cybersecurity capabilities of countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. They work with the Global Cybersecurity Center at the University of Oxford to design an online tool to implement the Capability Maturity Model of Cybersecurity, CMM, which uses 42 indicators covering various dimensions of cybersecurity. Using this tool, the project team received a great deal of information from stakeholders in countries. This information was then validated with the support of member states, and the report's conclusions were reviewed by our colleagues at the IDB, at Oxford, and the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. This report then is the culmination of the widest application of the CMM model yet undertaken, as it has been applied to 32 countries within the period of 1 year. This analysis is accompanied by the contributions of international experts on cybercrime in the hemisphere and provides a better understanding of the strengths and challenges in cybersecurity in each country. These findings represent a snapshot in time of an ever-changing landscape. However, conclusions in the report highlights a very stark truth. The region must do a lot more work in this area to ensure our cyber borders are as secure as our physical borders. For some countries, this task may seem insurmountable. Nevertheless, we hope that by improving our collective understanding of the cybersecurity challenges and opportunities presently confronting our region, the information and analysis contained in this report will assist stakeholders in all sectors, of course, government, the private sector, academia, and civil society, to better work together to build a more secure, resilient, and productive cyberspace in our hemisphere. The Organization of American States looks forward to continuing to play its role in this vital mission. Señoras y señores, I have the pleasure to present to you, in partnership with the Inter-American Development Bank and the Global Cybersecurity Capacity Center at the University of Oxford, Cybersecurity, Are We Prepared in Latin America and the Caribbean? Thank you very much.
Gracias, Senor Embajador. We will now switch to the panel format. We have two more speakers. Santiago Paz is the Director of Cybersecurity, E-Government, and the Information Society Agency of Uruguay. He's the founder of the National CERT and has managed many projects, including the deployment of the government's private data network, design and deployment of the security system for e-government, and perhaps closest to my heart, design and implementation of PKI Uruguay. We used to have a rule at CSIS that if you said PKI, you had to pay $5 into a kitty, but it's good to see it's actually working somewhere. He's also managed numerous projects in the private sector, including international government projects and cooperation with the Uruguayan government and OAS. After him, we'll have Michael Goldsmith, Senior Research Fellow at the Department of Computer Sciences and Worcester, did I get it right? Worcester, sorry. Worcester College.
Not easy.
Worcester College in Oxford. He was one of the pioneers of automated cryptological analysis. His research has investigated projects ranging from highly mathematical semantic models to multidisciplinary research. He's an associate director of the Cybersecurity Center and co-director of the newly launched Center for Doctoral Training in Cybersecurity, and is active in the IAAC Academic Liaison Panel. So it's nice to have a real mathematician here with us today. I don't know which is easier for you. Do you want to speak from the podium, or would you?
I can speak.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you,
Santiago.
Thank you, Luis. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to deliver the following remarks in behalf of Mr. Clastornik, which is the Executive Director of the E-Government and Information Society Agency of Uruguay. And he's also the chairman elected for the second period for the network of e-government authorities in Latin America and Caribbean, the Red ILAC. And unfortunately, last minute matters prevent him to be here. And he really would love to be here because he's really committed with the subject. So it's a pleasure to be here in DC for the release of the cybersecurity report produced by the Inter-American Development Bank and the Organization of American States in partnership with the University of Oxford and in collaboration with so many institutions such as the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the Getulio Vargas Foundation, the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams, the Council of Europe, the World Economic Forum, and the Potomac Institute. I would like to have this opportunity to acknowledge the key role that OAS and IDB have played in supporting cooperation in the region in the area of e-government and cybersecurity. We are having quite interesting projects for the region with the technical and financial support from your organization. And we, the government, truly appreciate your effort. Uruguay is a small country, part of a developing continent, and right in between two huge neighbors. At the beginning of the century, ICT revolution hit our region, and during the first term in the office of President Vargas back in 2005, We realize that ICT is in fact a great equalizer, and small countries with an intelligent use of technology can do a lot to enhance the quality of education, the government services, and the economy. What we have been doing in the last decade is to give people as much of ICT access as possible. To children at school with the Ceibal plan, that I'm sure that you all know about it, to stock breeders at the countryside with livestock traceability, for the general population with high quality and low cost connectivity, and to the government with a digital government strategy under an holistic approach that has involved from the very beginning some aspect such as privacy, electronic certification, internet governance, and cybersecurity. All this because everyone will require proper knowledge of ICT in the current society. The world is undergoing a complete change of the way things are done. Most of the countries have been talking about digitalization. We are moving from a scenario where we didn't share anything with anyone to a scenario of interoperability, where we have common standards and we share data and information within the country and with other nations. And a scenario of social media and full interaction where people have the urge to basically share everything. All of us here today, the government, the private sector, the academia, the technical community, the civil society, and international organization, we all have a major role in building confidence and security in this new world that we are living. By that, I mean that cybersecurity report is being released today, address a very timely area, and pose quite a provocative question and relevant one. Are we ready? The report contains the view of several experts that in fact are coincident in some issues that we need to pay attention, such as the importance of international cooperation, local regulatory frameworks, and legal basis for dealing with cybercrime, the elaboration of national strategies, the strength of response team, the public and private cooperation, and of raising awareness in order to build a culture of cybersecurity. Combining a variety of relevant players to share their point of view is not an easy task. We congratulate both institutions, IDB and OEAS, for this effort. It also introduced a cybersecurity readiness assessment model, an extremely useful tool to guide our actions. Here, I want to underline the serious work based in a multi-stakeholder consultation of the Global Cybersecurity Capacity Center of the University of Oxford, the IDB, and the OEAS have done with this methodological proposal. Its application in 32 countries to present a detailed profile within the state of situation of each of them is of great value. In closing, I want to acknowledge the leadership of the President Moreno and Secretary General Almagro for bringing this important topic into the political agenda by presenting this cybersecurity report, which will be instrumental in the upcoming regional discussion. This is very useful and successful contribution, and I have high expectation of its effects and the way it can evolve in the coming years. In behalf of Clastornik, thank you very much.
Thank you. If I could now invite Professor Goldsmith.
Thank you.
Do you want to come up? Or?
Perhaps, yes. President Moreno, Mr. Deputy Secretary General, distinguished fellow speakers and distinguished guests. I would like to say straight away how delighted I am to be here today in Washington, and would like to thank the Inter-American Development Bank and the Organization of American States for this kind invitation to witness this important and landmark occasion. I'm excited to see the launch of the regional in-depth cybersecurity study with contributions from leading experts from across the world. The Organization of American States has been our first strategic partner, and I am very excited to see the mutual benefits for both our organizations have benefited from our ongoing collaboration and cooperation. The Global Cybersecurity Capacity Centre at the University of Oxford was a direct output of the London process, in that it was created as the result of a competition run by the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office and established to build a global understanding of effective cybersecurity capacity. And we are heavily focused on working with leaders from across the world, and the OAS time and time again has proven to be a leader in this region to produce the fruits of this leadership in the report you see before you today. Back in October 2014, colleagues from the OAS and colleagues from the Capacity Centre met here in Washington to develop the operationalisation of the cybersecurity capacity maturity model for the world and most importantly for your region. This operationalisation took shape in the form of the application tool whose output you see in the report. And the team spent around 3 weeks face-to-face with representatives of the Organization of American States thinking about making this first of its kind intellectually rich model which draws together cybersecurity considerations across 5 dimensions and measures them at 5 distinct levels of maturity, and to make that digestible to nation states with a particular focus on Latin America and the Caribbean region. This was in turn building on around 18 months of intense intellectual effort among the 11 academics leading the centre and extensive consultations with around 200 experts from across all sectors. The centre is hosted and staffed by Oxford and calls heavily on Oxford's power to convene, but it draws upon expertise from around the world, and our tagline is by the world, for the world. We claim no proprietary ownership of the tool. It's all yours. The model, as many of you will know, is devised of 5 dimensions of capacity, which are all nicely colour-coded in the report. The experience gathered via this study will feed directly into revisions of the model as we start to build a better understanding of what works and what may be less effective. And we want to thank you for this ongoing input into a very ambitious global study which we are leading back in Oxford. We've now visited around a dozen countries on 4 continents plus in the middle of the Pacific, but Jamaica and Colombia were our first, and it's my personal regret that I was unable to join the team on those missions to your beautiful region. I would like to reiterate what the Deputy Secretary General said, that this is a snapshot of the current state in the region. And we would encourage you to revisit in a few years to see how things have improved, and also to remember that, as in all investments, your value may go down as well as up with time if you relax too much. We will be very happy to continue to work with you in order to help achieve this. And finally, I would like to thank once again the governments of your member states, the IDB and the OAS, and in particular Belisario and his team for their stellar drive, ambition and leadership, and for making today a reality. I congratulate you and commend this report to you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thanks. We now have time for me to ask some questions to the panel, and then for you to ask some questions to the panel. So please be thinking of your questions. Not a lot of time, however. Let me start with one that I think all of our panelists have been speaking about, and I'll ask President Moreno perhaps to answer it first, but OAS and the IDB are indeed leaders in this space, and they have done amazing work. IDB's involvement is particularly valuable because it reinforces the economic aspects of the problem. But when we look around the world, there are many organizations involved in cybersecurity. So one question I would have, and we'll start with President Moreno, is how can other multilateral organizations support the region, Latin America and the Caribbean and the countries in the region, to overcome cybersecurity challenges? What do you see the role of the IDB Where do you see others perhaps playing a role? Maybe we could start with you and then just go down the row and get some remarks.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that question. I mean, clearly, the one astonishing factor that looking at areas of this report is the current costs of lack of cybersecurity in Latin America. And those are basically around $90 billion a year. So think for a minute. Of course, these losses are not all incurred by governments. They're incurred by the large of society. But certainly, when you think about productivity, when you think about efficiencies, this is certainly an area where a lot of progress could take place. On the other hand, I believe that this requires a set of partnerships. Clearly, there are dimensions from the development perspective, but equally there's governments like the United States, like Korea, South Korea, like Israel, who have advanced significantly in addressing these issues. And I think there's a lot of lessons learned that Latin American countries clearly can benefit from. In terms of what can a development institution like the IDB do, is a lot of the work on the policy space, working with governments, where I think is most of our advantage. And here I'm talking about how do you help design a cybersecurity strategy. As you can see from the report, and as I was saying earlier, if you look at a lot of indicators, there's probably 1 out of 5 countries that has done anything around that. My memory doesn't fail me. In the cybersecurity strategy, it is countries like Jamaica, like Trinidad and Tobago, like Panama, like Colombia, and like Uruguay, who are the only 5 who have a strategy. And that tells you a lot in the direction where we need to move. The other part, a little bit the professor touched on it, is how do we sensitize societies? And there needs to be an awareness, like there is an awareness when you think about crime, especially citizen security. A lot of the ways where you can make a difference is by society being engaged and being out there. So that's another area. Then we need the talent pool to work on this. Where are the professionals on cybersecurity across our region that can help? What could we make perhaps in some of the smaller countries a hub where you could have a pool of cybersecurity experts? In the larger countries, of course, they're going to be needed, but certainly a country like Uruguay, where as the panelists explained, they've done a lot in terms of connectivity and bringing education to schools through the uses of technology. A program that has been tremendously successful. And I think in the process, the government has learned a lot on how to deploy these kinds of things. And finally, there are the legal frameworks for ICT and the regulatory aspects. And again, these are some of the areas where we can work together. And really, I want to applaud Secretary Almagro. One of the first things he did when he came to Washington as Secretary General, he came over to the bank and said, how can we work together more and more? And this is certainly an area of cooperation that we can develop with the OAS, because they also have, the political dialogue with governments that is very important. And, these solutions are not just technical. They're political, they're financial, and it is the combination of the three where you can really make a difference.
Thank you. Yes, I would put political and financial probably ahead of technical, but those were all valuable points. Professor, could I ask you the question was, how can multilateral organizations such as the IDB help Latin American countries overcome the cybersecurity challenge?
First, let me say that from the rather sparse survey that we've done of the rest of the world, Latin America is not the only place that there are problems. None of the world, probably including Europe and the US, is completely clean in terms of its readiness. And I don't think anybody has all of the solution to it. But there are organizations who have got good experience with certain aspects. So, for instance, in helping to develop strategies, that's something that the ITU and the Commonwealth Telecommunications Organisation have been doing very actively, as well as developing cybercrime legislation within nations. And that there is a slight danger that there are too many cooks and that you may get a lot of duplication of effort, which is obviously a waste when the amount of effort available is so limited. But if you can avoid that, the more that you can get from anybody who is willing to help you, the better.
Great, thank you. And I should pick up on Professor Goldsmith's point that we're talking about Latin America, but actually all countries are more or less at the same level. When one of the things that was a bit surprising in our part of the report was that while the leaders have made considerable progress, they haven't made that much progress. And so there's a lot of space for everyone to move ahead on this. Ambassador Mendez, can I ask you the question?
The complexity of the issue before us clearly indicates that this is an area in which there is tremendous potential for cooperation. I think that is an element that we need to keep in mind. At the OS, what we're doing right now is we're helping our member states to develop comprehensive national cybersecurity frameworks and strategies. And a very important part of this national comprehensive framework has to do with the laws. Beyond being able to detect the threats and beyond being able to find out where are your vulnerabilities, you need to have in place the legal frameworks to deal with the perpetrators. So we're doing that. We're helping countries with model legislation. We're helping countries to update their legal frameworks to be able to deal with these new threats, because a lot of them are things we hadn't been considering some time ago. The other thing that we're doing is we're helping our member states to establish what we call computer security incident response teams, CSIRTs, which basically are the firemen, the people that you will call to deal with an emergency, to deal with something that is happening at the technical level in a very quick response manner. So these are very, very specific areas in which we're already working with the member states of the OS. And I think that the wider we throw the net for strategic partners, the stronger and better prepared we will be to deal with the whole range of threats that we're only now beginning to understand. We're sure that they will get more complex as we move ahead.
Great, thank you. Santiago. Please.
Okay. Let me tell you before that I'm not a politician, so I'm going to talk from a technical point of view.
We forgive you in advance.
Thank you. As it's shown in the report, cybersecurity is not just about one dimension. It has a lot of dimensions, legal dimension, technical, institutional, education. There are a lot of dimensions when we talk about cybersecurity, and we must work in all together to get the goal. But at the same time, ICT is in every sector today. It's in the government, it's in the financial sector, in the military sector. As I mentioned before, in Uruguay, even the cows has a chip inside to get traceability. So I think that the awareness of all sectors, people that work in the financial sector, military sector, industrial control system, or even cows, they must know that ICT has a lot of benefits, but it has also some risk involved, and should work in every ICT project, in all the sectors. It should have a component of cybersecurity, and also a budget of cybersecurity. And if we add to that cybersecurity doesn't recognize geographical borders, all the international organization could help in be sure that all ICT project in the region has a cybersecurity part of that.
Great, thank you. Let me see, because we are a little pressed for time, if there are any questions in the audience. This is your big chance before we go through a complex evolution in the panel. But any questions, please? No? Really? We've got one in the back. Could you wait for the microphone, please?
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es José Alejandro Chamorro, soy de la empresa Password Consulting Services. Nosotros somos de Colombia y tenemos una sede en Nueva York. Hemos logrado la certificación de 2 ministerios, el Ministerio de Salud y el Ministerio de Ambiente en Colombia. Y creemos que el éxito en la certificación es Sistema de Gestión de Seguridad de la Información ISO 27001. Y el éxito de esto es la ley, que el gobierno exija la implementación de este tipo de sistemas. Pero creemos que, pues, para que madure esto, los entes de control tienen que exigir que esto evolucione, ¿no? Hacer que, pues, por ejemplo, en nuestro país, en este caso sería la Contraloría o la Procuraduría, no sé, en los otros países de Latinoamérica, hacer que esto evolucione para todas las entidades, ¿no? Teniendo en cuenta porque, por ejemplo, en el Ministerio de Salud, cuando empezamos a implementar el sistema de gestión de seguridad de la información, nos dimos cuenta cómo ya hay malware que está ya caracterizado para determinados países y cómo evolucionan de una manera pues que casi inteligente. Entonces creemos que pues ese sería como lo que hay que exigir, ¿no?, a nuestros países, que la ley la implementen y que sobre todo que cada día los entes de control la exijan para que puedan madurar. Gracias.
Okay. Any response from the panel? No, that was
So let me first try to quickly translate here to the professor. He might want to answer, but he must. For him, this could be Chinese or Spanish or whatever. But anyway,
I got Ministry of Health.
the point here is the following. His question is how important regulation is. How important is that regulation is not across one institution, but across all institutions, which, I certainly, from my perspective and for others who want to add, this is critical, as I was saying before. This is where I believe that both the OAS and the IDB can help governments in really working through issues of regulation and the financial implications that come side to side with that, because many times the regulatory decisions might require investments in different areas.
Yes, indeed. Substantive legislation is one thing. Getting your procedural rules to back that up and getting the talented pool of investigators and judiciary who are able to understand the issues in cybercrime is another aspect which really has to be addressed if you're going to be able to get a comprehensive viewpoint across the entire process.
I think that one thing we have to recognize is that the entire process of preparing your national legislation and your technical capacity, it's not a one-off game. It's very, very dynamic. And the more you develop it, the more you have to prepare for the new threats that will be coming along. So it's not like you build a firewall and then that's the end of the story. Even the laws will have to be updated as we go along with the technical capacity. So I think we're in for the long haul. The important is that if we're working on it together, then we bring together the best minds and the resources. And for us, the strategic partnership with the IDB is clearly very important, with the other institutes who are doing a lot of work on it.
Well, then in that case, let me say that we're exceptionally grateful to President Moreno and Ambassador Mendez for coming. I think the partnership between the Inter-American Development Bank and the OAS is really a global leader when it comes to promoting cybersecurity. So it was very great that they were willing to take a little time and come and talk to us today. What we're going to do now is, in this order, we'll cue a video from Sadie Crease at Oxford to just a minute to say thank you. We will move up some new panelists who I will introduce. And please join me in thanking President Moreno and Ambassador Mendez. Yeah.
They tell us to go.
That's your cue.
Habilidad
can't hear me. It's not working. Oh, well. All right. Melissa, she's famous, of course, for having led the 60-day review, which is the sort of seminal document when it comes to cybersecurity. She served in 2 presidential administrations and is a senior advisor at the Kennedy School at the Belfer Center, distinguished fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation in Canada, and the chair of the Council of Experts for the Global Cybersecurity Center in Italy, and a longtime friend who is one of the true leaders in the field. So Melissa, thank you so much for coming today. Danil Kerimi, another friend, is director for the Digital Economy and Global Technology Policy World Economic Forum. He shapes the World Economics Forum Global Tech Policy Agenda. He leads the work on internet governance and the digital economy, in addition to managing the Global Agenda Council on cybersecurity. Danil is the focal point for the forum's work with the Net Mundial initiative, work with ICANN and the Brazilian government. Prior to coming to the World Economic Forum, he held various leadership positions in the UN, the OSCE, which is a remarkable experience, the International Organization for Migration, very handy at this time, and other international bodies. Finally, our last panelist, please come up, is Luiz Moncau. Did I get your name wrong? Oh, good. What do you know? Luiz Moncau, the coordinator, Center for Technology and Society at the Getulio Vargas Foundation, which many of us know is probably Brazil's leading foundation when it comes to these matters. He's also at the School of Law and previously worked at the Brazilian Institute of Consumer Defense in the areas of telecommunications and access to knowledge. He's the public lead for Creative Commons in Brazil and has authored numerous articles on the subjects related to intellectual property. So what we're going to do now, can we get the video? And I thought they were going to remove is this good? Here we go.
So heartfelt congratulations to the Inter-American Development Bank and the Organization of American States on the launch of this historic study, the first in-depth look at cybersecurity capacity across the region and the OAS membership. We're so proud and excited to have been part of this endeavor, to have worked with you on the cybersecurity capacity maturity model that's underpinned this study, and we very much look forward to the fruits of your labor. In particular, we really believe that this kind of insight will enable the region to become much more strategic in how it goes about developing cybersecurity capacity. It should enable you to be able to coordinate your efforts so much more effectively and to share in that resource that's being invested. We at the Oxford Centre and others around the world look to your experiences so that we can learn and share from them across all of the regions. And we very much encourage you to do this on a frequent basis, every 2 years, for example, so that you can learn of the progress being made, and we can also share that learning and that insight. So congratulations to all. And we're very excited. So sorry we can't be with you today. So heartfelt congratulations to the Inter-American Development Bank and the Organization of American States on the launch of this historic study, the first in-depth look at cybersecurity capacity across the region and the OAS membership. We're so proud and excited to have been part of this endeavor, to have worked with you on the cybersecurity capacity maturity model that's underpinned this study, and we very much look forward to the fruits of your labor. In particular, we really believe
relatively brief of their contribution to the report, their views on the report, and the issues writ large. So with that, why don't we just go down the row? It's easiest that way, and we can start with Luiz, if that's okay.
Okay, can you hear me? Is the mic on?
Yep.
Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation to be here. It's an honor for me to be representing the CTS, the Center for Technology and Society at FGV, here at this high-level meeting. And I would like also to applaud the initiative of the International Development Bank and the OAS, and with the contribution of Oxford for this great work. I was reading other countries' reports, and this is extremely useful tool for us to move the discussion forward. Well, when we developed our contribution, our expert contribution to the report, we tried to advance three main ideas. The first one is that Latin America, of course, we all know that it's a heterogeneous pool of countries. So there are countries in different levels of development with different levels of economic development in different sectors, and different historical backgrounds, different concerns with the specific things, different languages, which sometimes is a barrier for cooperation, and different problems. So the discussion, the debate about cybersecurity in Latin America and in Europe or US is a little bit different. I believe we are not so much concerned with terrorism or other cyber issues related to terrorism, but we are very much concerned with frauds, with other cyber threats. And Brazil in this case is in a specific situation because we are holding the Olympic Games and we held the World Cup, and this is certainly a possible focus for terrorist attacks. So, so we need to look at each country differently, and so this is one thing we try to advance. And we have, and the report makes it very clear. There are different levels. There are countries that have the strategy for cybersecurity. There are countries that don't have. Brazil developed a document on that now, and then last week developed a document on digital governance. We don't know how these things will dialogue, so this is a matter for future investigation. The second thing we try to advance is about some trends in the continent. So we see the trend of legal efforts to defining crimes in the cyber environment, if I can say that. And we see also the trend of numerous laws being passed about data retention. So this is a matter of concern for some civil society groups, and there are many people concerned about the privacy impact of these measures and the proportionality of these measures. So this is something that need to be on the table for discussion. And the last thing is that considering the multiple issues that cybersecurity involves and the multiple and diverse environment of each country, diverse characteristics of each country, there is a need to propose a way forward that contemplate, we believe, a multi-stakeholder engagement. So I believe that we were very happy when we were invited to contribute to the report, because sometimes you read some cybersecurity or some cybersecurity documents and you see only the reference to the cooperation between governments and industry, and civil society is not there, or academia sometimes is not mentioned. So it's important for us to bring all interests to the same table, and this is the only way, we believe, to build a framework that is balanced and that attend all interests. So this was our contribution to the report.
Great, thank you. I'd note that one of the issues that I think was faced fairly early on in the process was some governments said, you know, we don't face a military threat. There's no likelihood of war, fortunately, in the hemisphere. So therefore, why do we need to pay attention to cybersecurity, or why do we need confidence-building measures, which often have a military implication? And I think one of the benefits of a report like this is that it helps move that discussion past that objection. Brazil, of course, as with Net Mundial and with its other activities, has played a leading role, a leading global role in helping put the larger problem of digital governance, digital security in the multi-stakeholder framework in an approach that's acceptable, amazingly enough, to almost all countries in the world, if you look at the outcome. So thank you for coming. Professor, I hate to call on you again, but that's what you're here for.
Indeed. Well, as you know, we contributed the methodology. We were a little concerned when we visited two countries and left the OAS to organise the exploration of the rest, in that wherever we've been, we have sent a team in country for about a week to do in-depth discussions with a wide range of stakeholders. And the model hasn't yet been developed into a state where it's really fit for self-assessment. But I think the methodology that the OAS actually deployed, which involved a few country visits, but mostly remote interviews with the stakeholders, followed up by finding the evidence which they said should exist and exploring it, has actually produced something which is, by and large, very credible. It seems to, if you look through, people haven't been grabbing for the numbers, which is always a problem with these things, although perhaps there's a counterbalance here in that painting yourself as in a parlous state may incline people to invest in you more, but no, and everything looks fairly plausible. It's on a par with most of the other nations that we've visited who aren't those who would regard themselves as in the top flight. And even the UK, when we visited them, which wasn't a long visit, weren't anywhere near being at level 5 in everything and not even in level 4 in many things. So I mean, the fact that most people are in level 2 or thereabouts for most of their factors and straying up into level 3 at some points is nothing to be ashamed of. It's the state that the world is in. And the other thing that I discerned in a relatively brief scan of the report, I think I did actually read all of the country reports, but only fleetingly because I only got it at the weekend. It's notable that every nation is at least as advanced in its legal and regulatory dimension as it is in any of the others. And that's perhaps unsurprising considering the considerable investment both of finance and effort that has gone into developing regional compatible laws and indeed globally the efforts that have gone out to bring people to the Budapest Convention or any of its equivalent rivals. So that is some way confirmatory that we're getting the right answers out of this.
Great. Let me take a second and ask, from the experience you had with this report, are you considering any revisions or changes to the maturity model? Any work in that area?
We have been working on that for the past year, trying to absorb the lessons learnt, not only from the Latin American experience, but also from the other 10 or so countries that we visited around the world. And that is in a state where we will deliver it to our sponsors at the end of the month, but it's not really fully complete. We need to go out and consult more widely about whether the changes are sensible and so on. But also, we are looking very much at changing the deployment methodology to see whether we can come up with something which is easier to support countries doing this consultation themselves without people on site to keep them honest.
I'll just, interesting point. Melissa, let me ask you, you of course are one of the premier thinkers in this field, and your contribution to the report was essential. So could you give us your overview, your thoughts?
Of course, thank you very much. Buenas tardes. And What we did when we approached the analysis is, we looked at it using the Cyber Readiness Index and what does it mean to be cyber ready. And this is based on years of experience working not just in the United States government, but with governments all around the world. And how do you align the economic agenda with the security agenda? We're embracing the internet and the Internet of Things and embedding the information communications technologies into every single one of our critical services and citizen-facing services. And we're promising our countries that economic growth, the efficiency, the productivity, the education, the social advancement, and really largely the development of the countries to advance them and propel them into a digital century. As you look at Latin America and the Caribbean, you look at and you see that they're advancing 4 times faster in internet penetration and internet adoption than the developed countries. Well, that's because they're connecting, and many of the development initiatives are about getting broadband to the last mile, getting connected societies so they can get the connected services and they can advance along those lines. But when you look at many of those economic initiatives that are development initiatives, they don't have security at the core. They're not thinking about resilience, and they're not certainly considering the threats of whether it's I'm now a connected citizen and I have the ability to become a political activist and voice my opinion, or I have the ability to now intercept or connect and steal your personal identifiable information or your banking information because it has real value from a criminality perspective. Or I can steal your intellectual property and the great idea that your corporation has that could advance your country, but I can now steal it and propel my country faster than yours at a lower research and development cost. Or now, because I put so much of my critical society and services onto the internet, that I'm now seeing real business disruption and disruption of services and destruction of property, as we've seen recently in Ukraine with the downing of their grid or distributed denial of service against major corporations. So when we looked at it, we looked across 7 different areas and tying that link to the economics and the security agenda, which I think is so important of why the Inter-American Development Bank, the money and the funding of the development, pairing and cooperating with the Organization of American States, the security thereof, is such an important partnership. It's the only partnership globally that's looking at this, and a partnership that's needed that other banks should be looking at, and we should be looking at this region as the exemplar. So one of the core to that is how do you start to look at a national strategy that embeds the economics, the GDP growth, the health and resilience of society as we're going to connect more of society. To be honest with you, there's very few countries globally that are actually marrying the economic agenda and the national security agenda. Few. The United States, the United Kingdom are not doing it. And so when you look at the developed countries, that they're not the model to follow, and maybe we can create a new model. There were 5 countries that are developing the national security strategies in South America and in the Caribbean. It was Brazil and Colombia and Panama and Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica. But those strategies were actually helped with by the Development Bank of actually helping funding it, and OAS sending teams of experts to work with the countries to understand the nuances of what's going on in those countries and helping them think through the strategies. But it's not enough just to have a strategy. You have to start to think about what are the critical services that strategy is dependent upon. What are the core partnerships that you have to have in order to enable it? And when something happens, whether or not you have the incident response capability to manage it. Many of the countries in the region are starting to look at what are the incident response capabilities. If I were to have a national security crisis or an economic security crisis, what would be required in order to mobilize the right talent in order, business-wise, academia-wise, and government-wise, to solve the crisis? The third area that we started to look at was the law. And many of our countries are turning towards regulation because the government is in a crisis in the fact that most of the commercial entities are running our critical services. They're designing, they're operating, and they are going to be the core to the resilience. They're not necessarily putting the security at the core, and so we're going to regulate them to put the security at the core. Well, maybe we need to think about incentive mechanisms as well. You will get faster adoption from industry if you incentivize them through tax credits or other means along those lines, and regulation may not be the only path. But we're also looking at how do we address the criminality. And our colleagues from the Council of Europe submitted a fantastic paper of looking at that. And there are 2 states that have ascended to the Council of Europe Cybercrime Convention, and there are many others who are starting to look at, specifically in Panama, as an example of pulling forward many cyber laws and modernizing the laws. I'll have to say, from the United States perspective, as I worked for President Obama, I identified more than 80 laws that had to be updated for the digital age here in the United States. So many countries have a maturity curve to pass and to move along, the United States being one of the leaders. Another area that we looked at was having the sufficient awareness and campaigns and information sharing mechanisms that allow for learning across the board, not just from an industry, government to industry, but citizenry. And how do we create that sufficient level of awareness that you have to have security at the core and resilience at the core as you're adopting these information communications technologies. And if you don't think about the security up front, then you likely will be the victim of a crime and or something worse. Research and development was another area, and I personally had the opportunity to visit Chile. And they had a very unique emergent for research and development that's called Startup Chile. And it's part of their development initiatives of how do you pair and create an innovation economy and attract investment, attract ideas, create whole industries and contribute to the knowledge economy. It's not very much funding that's associated with Startup Chile, but it's having significant impact not only in the region, but those companies are actually exporting globally and being bought by global corporations. The sixth area that we looked at was diplomatic capability. And as was mentioned by the president, he talked about CICTA, and that Guatemala was really one of the leaders in actually bringing about the cybersecurity conversation into the region in the mid-2000s. And you've seen Brazil, as you mentioned, Jim, of leading the Net Mundial. It's not enough just to think about it from an international perspective. You have to think about diplomacy from both an economic and trade perspective, as well as a security agenda. And many of our diplomats are trained in one area and not the second. And they're not representing the full gambit of what's required at the diplomatic table, both economics requirements as well as security requirements. And there's much for all of our countries to be thinking about from a diplomatic angle. And then finally, there are many of us who are worried about the fact that our countries really are vulnerable, they are not resilient, and no country is cyber ready. And so there are many countries who are developing now military or security forces in order to ensure the resilience or to defend their countries upon attack. And in that aspect, Brazil was one of the leaders in the region of the first to stand up cyber defense forces and create that private-public partnership of thinking about security and resilience. When we looked at this, how do you marry the economic agenda with the security agenda? There is no country that's cyber ready, and we have to start with the national strategy of aligning those two interests up front. And many of our countries have divided them as looking only at the economic opportunity and not at the security requirement. And there are others that are only looking at the security requirement and not the economic necessity for moving forward in the digital age. So what we tried to convey in our particular part of this report was the importance of both. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Melissa. Damo, you bring kind of a unique perspective given your long work at the World Economic Forum and your global activities. So maybe you could then address what you're doing.
Thanks, Jim. The benefit of being second to the last speaker is that one can just agree with everything that has already been said in the panel in a much more eloquent way. But for a couple of perhaps additional points that I would like to make is that at the forum, I'm very privileged to serve as sort of a secretariat to a very distinguished group of experts called Global Agenda Council on Cybersecurity, chaired by President Ilves, that serves kind of as a permanent platform to observe the latest and greatest development across the cyber risk spectrum and inform our own partners about this development. And we always looked at this region, at Latin America and the Caribbean, as one of the greatest examples of where political and financial leadership came together to send a very strong message to the whole community at the highest level, really, to work together. And it wouldn't be possible without people like Alfred and Bailey and Carrie Ann and Barbara and many others, and Miguel and Carlos at the IDB. So this is just to applaud your efforts. I think this is a tremendous opportunity I haven't witnessed anything like that in other parts of the world where certain other developments have taken place, but at quite a different level. And as absolutely other speakers have said, marrying the two, this kind of security-oriented agenda and economy-oriented agenda, is extremely important, particularly in this space. Just last week, there was a great report by one of the leading consultancies that highlighted that among three really global flows that have driven globalization in the past, namely financial flows, human capital flows, and data flows, the only one that is continuing to drive this globalization is data flows, because after the crisis, the other two kind of dried up a little bit. As the speakers indicated, and as everybody in this room knows, this is a highly complex space where a lot of dimensions need to be addressed almost simultaneously. So the title, Are We Ready, is almost kind of asking, are we there yet when people just starting the marathon run? But it's a good thing, because he will continue working on this long term. And just to highlight, this is the complexity of the issue and how a lot of sectors have to come to work together in this. It was interesting to see Santiago here, who is the founder of Uruguay, when he was compared to fireman, his shoulders kind of went down. And he was, absolutely, the fire departments were among the first ones that really have addressed this issue. But real change arguably came from a completely different industry, which is insurance, which driven the behavioral changes that led to overall health of the system. So we were really privileged to the group, the Global Agenda Council that I have just mentioned, was really privileged to contribute to this report. I think the group really focused around the notion that as the region really embraces the full power of digital, it's really good to think about the risks associated with that as it moves forward, as we connect everything, as we really build up the critical infrastructure. As we buy connected toys. Now there's not a single industry that is not affected by this phenomenon. And again, just to applaud the leadership that two organizations are taking. Thank you.
Thank you, Danil. Santiago, the ultima palabra.
Okay, that's the last one. I agree with all of you. And I'm going to talk from the point of view of one of the country members that we are in this report, and we've been evaluated in the maturity model. And I think that it's really interesting and useful report. But I want to emphasize in 3 points. One of the points is the accuracy of the report. It's not easy in the region to be able to have to measure all the countries in the same level. We have different cultures, different language, and we call in the different way the same thing. So try to be accurate here is not easy. From my point of view, it represents very good the situation of Uruguay. And the second point that I think is very useful are the dimensions. There is a lot of standards and a lot of methodology that use dimensions to evaluate cybersecurity. I think that this dimension really represents which country should do in terms of maturity to evolve in cybersecurity. And it shows that you cannot work just from one point of view. You must to be really something like cybersecurity in balance. It's very useful for a country when we see that in the 5 dimensions we are very good in this dimension, but we have problems in the other one. Every country, when we do something well, we try to do always the same and work only in that we feel comfortable. And this report shows that we should work not only in the dimension that we feel comfortable. We should work also in the dimensions that we don't feel comfortable, we are not mature, we must evolve, and give us a guidelines to how to do it. And the third point is about the recommendation and roadmap. It gives the big picture of how should each country do, not only the diagnosis, also the roadmap to how to do to evolve in the balanced cybersecurity way. So that's my opinion.
Great. Thank you. We're approaching the moment when I'm going to ask the audience if they have any questions. I'm going to have one or two for the panel before then. I was going to make a joke in Spanish, but that would probably terrify you all, so we'll skip it. You should, if you want real fun, try to listen to me say confidence-building measures in Spanish. Whew. What I'd like to pick up on is a theme that emerged from many of the speakers, which is the importance of involving the private sector. And that's easier to say than it is to do. The first time the United States said we should involve the private sector was 1998, and it's either been the world's longest takeoff roll or a very bumpy ride. So I think Melissa mentioned incentives, other people mentioned things we could do to cooperate. Why don't we go down the panel again, starting with Luis, and say, okay, so we all say getting the private sector involved is great. How would you do it?
It's a hard question, but I think the incentives are a good path to bring the private sector to the table. But in the experience we had in Brazil, at least, calling everyone to the same table to discuss, even if you don't have any specific proposal to move forward. So the civil rights framework for the internet, which is was evaluated here, also as a legal framework that is important for cybersecurity. So even if you don't have a proposal yet, when you call everyone to the table, you have the chance to get in the different views and try to build a balanced approach to move forward. So I would say that the first and most important thing is to bring different people to the table to move forward.
Yeah, Net Mundial was really cool in a way because it was a different way of building governance and getting agreement. So when it started, I had mixed opinions on whether it would actually work. I was kind of confident because Brazilians always pull things off at the last minute, but you know, it was definitely a new approach and a hard thing to do. So it's a good model for us to think about with the private sector. Michael.
To some extent, the private sector has an interest anyway. And so self-preservation and self-interest should bring them to the party. Though there are some distorting factors, perhaps, in the global market. Very few jurisdictions have any notion of product liability for software, which is a major distorter of the way the world works.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think the interesting thing on software liability is whether and how the move to the Internet of Things will change that. Because
Absolutely.
It's one thing when your phone doesn't work, it's another thing when your house burns down or your car doesn't work. But that's a bit extreme. But you know, that's a crucial point. Yeah. Melissa?
So I think that there are a number of areas that the governments should think about from a private engagement in the private sector. First is that all governments are dependent upon the private sector for these delivery of these critical services. And it's important for the governments to really understand what are those dependencies and who are the key parties that will actually be able to restore those critical services if they are disrupted or if there's a crisis in hand. The Netherlands actually realized this as a small country and has actually put some of the key private sector entities as part of their National Security Council. So in a time of crisis, industry is alongside government in partnership in handling a national crisis. I think that the Netherlands is one of the countries to think about and follow in that area. The second is that inevitably both the private sector and the public sector are seeing lots of different threats to the networked infrastructure, whether it's the theft of my intellectual property in my corporation or the penetration of my government system to try to understand my sources and methods or my capabilities. And having a CERT, a Computer Emergency Response Team or Security Emergency Response Center that embeds both the expertise from the private sector as well as the government is important. Not all countries are approaching it this way. Some countries have their cert at an academic center, some have their cert within their government or their military, and whereas others have actually created this co-location of a center. The United Kingdom actually is one of the leaders of having the private sector and the public sector working in tandem, and that's being followed elsewhere. The third area, I think, is that we have a 25-year shortfall or planning cycle that we need to address for cybersecurity education. The skill sets don't exist in our corporations. They're not being introduced in our schools. And we need to have a multidisciplinary approach to education, because it's not just a computer science degree that I need. I need my diplomats to be trained. I need my businessmen to be trained. It needs to be pervasive. We need to have cyber fluency everywhere. So the government should be thinking about working with the private sector, and what does that digital fluency look like, and how are we going to introduce it from grade school to secondary school to the actual universities, and what does that 25-year plan look like? The fourth area is that the internet and the information communications technology represents a $19 trillion opportunity for my businesses over the course of the next 4 years. $19 trillion. My businesses are your businesses. It's every one of our corporations, all of our corporations globally. And so how are we going to actually, as countries, represent the interests of our respective corporations abroad in those trade negotiations, and as we're moving forward in the economic things? How are we going to ensure that they can, in fact, realize that economic opportunity? Because that'll be the growth of my particular country and the GDP well-being, and therefore it then transcends across my society. And I think that that is really at the crux of what's going on right now. And then finally, as we're starting to look at, those corporations are being victims of both our internal government policies and external government targeting of disrupting their businesses, stealing their intellectual property, and in fact destroying their infrastructures. And that's going to require a much more sophisticated conversation among our governments with our private sector to make sure we're representing their interests in a global digital society.
Thank you, Melissa. Danil.
So the group I mentioned earlier came up with a little bit of a kind of analysis and summary of their discussions. They contributed to this report, obviously. But what they really highlighted is that there's still lack of nuanced understanding of the starting points where private sector and public sector comes in to these issues very often. Now there are big corporations that perhaps have that capability, but a lot of smaller players don't. I see Michael here in the audience, and Cloudera is one of the few exceptions that actually have a policy person for a company that is fast-growing, but of that size. So here are a couple of thoughts that the group thought that the private sector should know about the public sector kind of attention and tension lines. And it's the potential international fragmentation along the jurisdiction, legal enforcement, of course, culture, language, and politics, and inability of a lot of these players to follow those fault lines. The second would be the international norm-setting procedure. It's very difficult to follow all these conversations across the globe and how they develop and when to intervene and when to kind of stand back and just allow the conversation to happen. And then obviously how those norms are enforced. Third is, of course, the role of public sector vis-a-vis private sector, where public sector, we talk about the role of public sector, but as a matter of fact, there are roles. It's a convener, it's an enforcer, it's a protector. There are so many facets to the public sector role vis-a-vis private sector. And then also public sector also needs to understand that the private sector actors have a very different and complex nuanced set of starting points where they such as, for example, misalignment of incentives for security. Sometimes it's just better to put a product out there without and kind of think about patching the security issues later on, and also ecosystem complexities, as you have mentioned, the software liabilities landscape may be shifting, maybe not, depending on how different lenses and different products are playing out. Information sharing is obviously a huge issue. I think the United States is trying various approaches, and some of them are more successful, and I'm sure that countries in the region and globally can learn from that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Perhaps the last point is sorry.
No, he's relieved.
The story I like always to tell in this case is that it may sound overwhelming to a lot of people, but the first escalator in the world was deployed in Harold's department store in 1890s. And as a matter of fact, the store had to hire 2 additional people when that happened because everybody was so freaked out of self-moving stairs that they had to put 2 employees on the top of the stairs, one with the sniffing salt for ladies and with the sherry to gentlemen, kind of to welcome them and relax them. So as much as some of us would hope to get a shot of sherry at the end of the escalator right every time we take it now, obviously we got used to the new technologies and it's not as scary for us as we move forward.
Thank you. Okay, about public and private cooperation in Uruguay. I think that I'm going to talk about Uruguay, but I think it's very similar in many countries. We have basically 3 ways. One of the ways is when you got regulations, the guy from Colombia mentioned before, that is some regulation that makes mandatory the cooperation or make mandatory cybersecurity as is in financial sector or other sectors. There is also economic incentives for cybersecurity. The taxes agents in Uruguay, for example, with the electronic invoice project, they exonerate many taxes about cybersecurity products and services about cybersecurity. But that 2 approaches are very top-down approaches. And as the National CERT Director, we have the everyday work to do. And sometimes it's easy to get public and private cooperation from a bottom-up approach, when the main idea behind that is trying to find which is the value that we can add to the private business. It's say, okay, from the government, from the National CERT, what can we do to help, to improve, to enhance the private business and get a win-win situation. I think that, for example, with the ISP, we got that approach in Uruguay, and that been very effective way to work. The same with the financial sector, that because it was very easy for us to find which is the value that we add to their business. So it was easier that we can get agreement with a win-win situation and cooperation. I think in another kind of sector it's not so easy, but I think that a combination of both approaches, the top-down and the bottom-up, is the only way to get a good balance in private and public cooperation.
Great, thank you. I think what I'd like to do now is sort of the panel equivalent of speed dating and have kind of a lightning round. They aren't prepared for this. But the question I thought of is, what would be the top 2 or 3 priorities you would want to see for any country if you had to do a couple things immediately? And I'm going to cheat by stealing all the good ones. You can feel free to repeat them, but clearly you need a national strategy. Perhaps we all agree with that. The second one is you need cooperation, both internationally and with the private sector. The third one I'm a little split on. You could say that you need to have agency responsibilities and create the agency structure. Or you could say you need to have leadership buy-in. You need to have the senior leaders say, yes, cybersecurity is important. So in just going down the row again, and we'll do our traditional thing here and start with Luiz. What would you want, for Brazil, for the region, for the world? What do you think the top 2 or 3 priorities ought to be for this?
One of the top priorities we identified is in our contribution, and I think I didn't mention this on the first place, is that the legal agenda of the region needs to move forward. So one specific point for if we look to Brazil, and you can look for other Latin American countries also, Brazil doesn't have a data protection law. And this is intimately related to the issues we are discussing here. So the protection of privacy, and this leads to some bad behaviors and bad conduction of some process by the government, including. So like the government sharing information about citizens in exchange of some, for example, digital certificates. This happened in Brazil. This didn't happen because it became public. So if you have drawing the specific guidelines for how public officials should act would be an important thing, and moving the legal agenda forward, specifically in the issue of privacy, I would say that's the main concern.
My one word of advice would be to try and avoid what the European Union does, but perhaps Michael has different views on that. Michael, do you want to do, what would be the priorities for you?
Don't leave the EU. No.
I thought about saying Brexit and I resisted.
No, I think I would pick one of yours, the agency leadership buy-in one. I think you probably need both, or at least extrapolating wildly from the limited number of data points we have. The thing that seems to correlate most closely with overall level of maturity, or rather lack of it, is if you don't have anybody who takes responsibility, whether that's a particular minister or a particular agency or whatever. And the only thing worse than that is when you have two.
Melissa, thank you.
I think that, I mean, as one of the things that's most important is that countries have to align their digital agenda or their innovation agenda with their security agenda, and that's not really happening anywhere. And when you start to align those agendas in one place, it requires national leadership to drive it, to keep it focused with time-based objectives and recognizing that the economic benefits that are being promised will only be achieved if you put security at the core. That would be the first thing. Second, I think that it's essential to look at where can I have the most impact in the shortest amount of time, and I think that the internet service providers can be doing more for all of our countries because they are the pipe of the internet services and they know when you've been infected. And there are some countries around the world that are turning to their internet service providers to be that, if you look at it as either chlorine in the water or fluoride in the water to make you stronger, and to clean up the core infrastructure. And as we adopt and embed more and more of the information communications technologies over the next 4 years, the gap of our vulnerabilities and exposure is going to increase at an exponential level, and you're going to have to stop or close the gap quickly. The only place you can do that is at the internet service providers. And then finally, this is not a one and done legislation like we might think about here in the United States. It's going to be a multi-year and potentially a multi-decade plan. And that getting national leadership and buy-in from not just the government sector, but the private sector will be essential. And I think creating that 25-year plan as opposed to a 2-year plan or a 4-year plan is going to be what's required from all of us.
Great, thank you, Danil.
About priorities, I think the ones that haven't been brought up are among the most acute ones that industry faces. And by saying industry, actually, it's even more acute in the governments across the world is the talent. Availability of just personnel who can handle these issues. And it's not only the technical talent, but also obviously the more holistic talent that can combine policy, legal, and technical aspects of the conversation. I also, just coming back to the theme of the flows, I generally think that to create value, data has to flow. So anything that anyone within academia, technical community, civil society, governments, and business can encourage flows, I think would bring the value. Obviously, there are legitimate policy concerns that need to be addressed and in the holistic way. But again, another story from the UK, sorry, this is very UK focused, but I believe in the 1860s, there was a series of locomotive laws that basically said that any self-driving vehicle at that time that bent steam engine would have to have a person walking 100 yards in front of it with 2 red flags. Now, imagine that how implementation of that law would have to happen these days. So just kind of keep a broader perspective, and in all fairness, that was addressed very quickly. So that's back to Melissa's points, where it has to be very holistic, constantly review and broader, longer-term perspective.
So that might make a good title for a book, Don't Frighten the Horses. But anyhow,
okay, I think that the top 3, I absolutely agree in the first one with Melissa, and I have a small difference that I think that actually the cybersecurity agenda should be aligned with the digital agenda. I think that for the development of the economy and the society, the digital agenda is a key tool for that, and cybersecurity agenda should be aligned of that. If not, if we try to just work on cybersecurity with no aligned objectives, we can make a mistake. The second one is education and awareness, and I think that we must have good training people in all countries because at the end of the day, it's not just organizations who've been involved in this. At the end of the day, it's people who really move the world. So we need that people be good training in cybersecurity and awareness about what that means. And the third one, and is very particular in Latin America, is continuity. The continuity in cybersecurity or in cyber agenda in Latin America, it's not easy to see countries that belong for a long time with the same authorities without any change, just work in the same issue. Cybersecurity and digital development is not one day that you get from one day to other. You should work for many years in that, and it's very important, the continuity.
Okay, thank you. Let me turn to the audience and see if you have any questions. I see two. We've got Mike Nelson over here. If I could ask you to wait for the microphone, please. And then we have one on this side.
I'm Mike Nelson. I work for Cloudflare, which is a web security firm. If you take Cybersecurity 101, basic class, you learn that there's the CIA principle: confidentiality, integrity, availability. Unfortunately, here in the US, most reporters and policymakers haven't taken Cybersecurity 101, and almost all the focus here is on confidentiality and security breaches, credit cards being stolen, intellectual property being stolen. Listening to the discussion over the last couple of hours, I get a sense that in Latin America, there's more emphasis as well on availability. And I'm glad to hear that, since that's what we do at Cloudflare. I didn't hear a lot about protecting the integrity of data. Malicious hackers who can change a few digits in a banking database or mess up medical records can really undermine the trust in the system, even if they don't steal the records and they don't close down the system. So my two parts of the question: one, do you get a sense that Latin America is taking a more balanced view? And two, is there something that can be done to get people to recognize the real serious threats of malicious hackers destroying the integrity of databases? Thank you.
Mike, you get 2 copies of the report for having stumped the panel. No, go ahead, please. I'll answer if nobody else does.
I think that Latin America and the Caribbean are trying to actually just connect their people to the internet. And that is the first and foremost responsibility of the countries in order to achieve that economic opportunity. So it's about availability first. And then second, it starts to address some of the confidentiality pieces. And you're correct that integrity is not really part of the agenda. But I can't tell you any country that actually has integrity of the data at the top or even part of the agenda. And so perhaps as somebody that we need to think about a balanced agenda globally and think about, all aspects of it. And that'll be particularly important as we're connecting more things, whether it's the connected citizen to the connected house, to the connected critical service, to the connected country. I can mess with the integrity on any one of those points, and it'll cascade failure through the rest of the society because we haven't built the isolation mechanisms in, the resilience mechanisms in, and we're not thinking about protecting data at the core.
I can't speak for this region, but integrity is there to some extent in the European legislation, in that you have the right to correct incorrect information about you that is held by people as part of the data protection legislation. I might have a small debate with you about whether CIA is Cybersecurity 101 rather than Information Security 101. I think cybersecurity is broader than that.
I always wonder too if it's an idea that is now entering its 3rd decade, whether maybe it's time to reconsider it. But that is, again, another debate. So I never use the letter CIA here at CSIS. We had a question over there.
Good afternoon, members of the panel, and thank you very much for your input today. My name is Prasanna Vernkar. I work with Creative Associates International. We primarily work with the United States Agency for International Development. One of our, or many of our programs are actually in Latin America, specifically Central America. And in Central America, we deal with issues as it pertains to security. Cybersecurity is part of it, but largely it's dealing with gangs, transnational criminal networks that operate in particular areas such as Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. Understanding the study was really based on a snapshot, and I am taking your word at that. I would like to take a step further and see what kind of recommendations the panel has in terms of Central America and what can be done in terms of the coordinating aspects, whether it's diplomatic, whether it's technical services, and if there is any additional data that came from the study that we can extrapolate that could apply specifically to issues that are relevant to Central America. Thank you.
Well, I mean, when you look at what's going on from a Central America perspective, Panama is leading Central America with the development of a strategy and thinking through the laws and other things. The rest of the countries in Central America, if I think I'm correct, don't have the strategies and have not started to move forward with that. So you need to first, begin the path of how am I thinking about my digital agenda with my security agenda and cybersecurity per se. And then what am I facing as a country specifically as my highest threat? Is it terrorism? Is it criminality? Is it criminality against my financial institutions or is it against my population? And that will start to redefine or think about what are the key priorities for the specific country within that region. But each, as you know, country has a very specific or different challenge that they're facing. While criminality might be a commonality, each country is going to approach it differently. Costa Rica doesn't have a military, and they're very proud of that. So how you're going to go about and create the security aspects around that will be different than the way Panama will approach it or Guatemala. So I look at it as the region is still maturing, but they can start with the overall strategy.
And one thing you might want to think about is that a lot of these countries are still at a relatively early deployment of information technologies, and so that gives you an opportunity as you think about it, particularly with the national telcos, to build in security or at least get them to focus on security. The other thing that probably fits in more with the work you're doing in other areas is that it's crucial to have adequate law enforcement capabilities. It's crucial to have the police with the skills and to some extent the technology that allows them to enforce laws. But that points to the point I think a couple of the panelists made is you need laws to enforce. And if I was from the Justice Department, I would say look at the Budapest Convention. I do think it's the best model out there, but I would say police and laws, early opportunity. The final thing, and this is of course the theme of our whole panel, is partnerships. Partnerships both with other countries in the region, given how interconnected they are, partnerships with partners and allies, both regional and extra-regional, so whether it's Spain or the UK or the US, the European Union, and partnerships with international institutions, particularly the OAS and the IDB. So those three things, think about where you are in the deployment cycle, build up your law enforcement capabilities, and develop those partnerships. And those require some resources, but they're not resource intensive. A lot of times people think you need to go out and buy a giant supercomputer or something. You don't. Right? There are things you can do. So we have an opportunity, I think, in the region and in Central America, in the other countries, to really move the ball forward in a way that we have not seen in other parts of the world. Europe has a unique security situation. Danil is certainly familiar with it. The Western Hemisphere has a unique opportunity, and Central America take some of those unique opportunities and use it to improve their own security. I'm going to ask if there are any final questions, otherwise I'm going to begin to speak in Spanish, which will terrify you all. No? No further questions? Well, please join me in thanking the excellent panel.